Hi, it's Bighara with another installment of my video blog. Coming to you from my semi-new laptop, and I thought I'd just do a quick one here about character death. This is something that comes up from time to time in most campaigns when you're playing old school style D&D and D&D games like Labyrinth Lord or Osric or what have you. And that's not a bad thing. If there's no risk, there's no real challenge, so it's only fitting that occasionally a character might die. Even a whole party might get wiped out. The dreaded TPK. But I want to talk a little bit about how death is usually handled by the book and in my personal experience. In the book, there are several ways to overcome the idea of a player character dying. There is, of course, Raise Dead. That's probably the most common spell to use because it is the lowest level in the standard rules for these types of resuscitative spells. And it means that while you would need to be a relatively high level cleric to be able to cast it, it's not something that would be completely beyond a party that might have some funds and maybe isn't just starting out to have it happen. There are some drawbacks. There's a limited window of how long you have before it's just too late to use the spell. You need to have a relatively intact corpse, so just bringing back a finger or something isn't going to do it. And as I said, you're going to have to find a cleric of typically at least 9th level because it's a 5th level spell. The one that everyone talks about is Resurrection. And Resurrection, and it goes by different names, Lesser Resurrection, True Resurrection, Full Resurrection, and so forth and so on. But by the like basic expert rules and things like that, Resurrection is typically referring to a much higher level spell, a 7th level spell typically, and you're going to need a cleric that's well into double digits to be able to cast it. And this pretty much means it doesn't matter how long they've been dead. You don't even need a complete corpse to do it. And you can bring a character or non-player character back to life under most circumstances. I should also point out that in Raise Dead, I forgot to mention that usually the character, when they're revived, is in a pretty weakened state. So they're not really ready just to jump up and start adventuring some more. Whereas with Resurrection, they're pretty much just good to go. Anything that was done to them beforehand, let's say, you know, they had been, maybe their arm had been cut off or what have you, all that's fixed. So, Resurrection, obviously a much more powerful spell. Likewise, it means you're going to need a higher level cleric to do it, and if you're paying for it, you're probably going to pay a lot more. Now, there are magic items. One of the classic items is the Rod of Resurrection, which is, incredibly handy item to get a hold of if you actually have a cleric in your party and you can carry one around. As a DM, I've let that happen once or twice, usually in a sort of let the dice fall where they may sort of thing, where rolling a random magic item, and that's what came up. It is an incredibly powerful item and not one you want to let the PCs just run amok with. Fortunately, it is charged, which means eventually it goes away. Another spell, Reincarnation. This is a fun one. I actually wrote about this in my written blog, Echoes from the Geekcave, because you can bring a person back, but they're going to come back with a new body and possibly with a new class and even possibly be a new species. And this is a lot of fun. A couple times I've gotten to use it. I got to use it as a player character, and I brought back one of my fellow player characters who died, and I brought him back and he became a gnome, which was pretty funny. I was kind of hoping for some of the really weird ones, like maybe he could come back as like, a unicorn or a rock or something like that. That would be hilarious to me. This is not one that This is not one that people typically choose to use if they have the option, because, like I say, you don't really come back as your character. You come back sort of as someone else, including it being possibly a different level. So it is unusual, but as a DM, it's a fun spell to throw in there because of some of the odd effects. Lastly, I was going to mention one that people don't always equate with bringing back the dead, but it's certainly capable of it, and that's Wish. Wish is a very powerful spell, and yes, you can use it to resurrect someone if you need to or want to. It is not the only thing you can do with Wish, and Wish is one of those spells that really kind of deserves its own discussion, but it is out there. The fun part about Wish is there are almost no limits to what, restrictions on what you need or don't need to be able to bring someone back from the dead. But the DM does have the option of messing with you about the wording, so they can give you a hard time. So that's sort of a by the book rundown of the major ways that you deal with somebody who's dead and getting them not dead. I mentioned in one blog where there's the spell Neutralize Poison that can actually bring back a dead person who's been poisoned, but only for 10 rounds. So that you can sort of count that one, but that's very, very narrow applicability. In my experience as a player, back when I was younger, Resurrection came up all the time. We were running higher level characters. It was much easier to have access to it. You had player character clerics who had the ability to just pray for resurrection, and then you just would cast it the next day, and then that player was back in the game. Death was just a speed bump. It wasn't really that big a deal. Yes, in first edition you had things like the resurrection percentage. You had things like you would lose constitution points, or there was a chance the resurrection would fail, things like that. But that rarely came up. But it was always that lingering possibility. There was also, like I said before, items like Rods of Resurrections, Rings of Wishes, all these sorts of things. So it was very unusual that a character simply could not be brought back if they had died in a typical way. As a DM, I have not often run games where the characters have gotten to be high enough level to use Raise Dead or Resurrection or things like that, at least in terms of being able to cast it. I mentioned before that I've had Rods of Resurrection show up as magic items in the party's possession, so they have had that to use, but that's not typical, and it is also, like I said, something I allowed because it was a let the dice fall where they may situation, and that was what was rolled, and I said, well, we're going to stick to it. If it had been something really ugly, you would have had to deal with that. You got something really cool. Good for you. I don't have anything against characters or players bringing characters back from the dead if that's what they want to spend their time and resources on. As a rule, like I say, if they're not high enough level to cast these spells themselves, then they're going to be dealing with things like significant expense, possibly being indebted to a temple or a priest of some sort for goods or services or quests or things like that. You can even have in cases where in certain settings a cleric may only bring someone back if they are of their faith. Likewise, you might have clerics that believe that death is final and there should be no resurrection, and that's just part of their religion. You can work all that into the setting. That can be fun. You want to be careful that you're not doing that just to screw the players over. You want to have that be sort of established ahead of time so they know that, no, we can't go to the Green Temple because the Green Temple doesn't believe in resurrection. We've got to find a blue or a red temple or whatever. You get the idea. I think that it's fine to have it in your games. I think it's fine to kind of leave it sort of as written. D&D was sort of written with the idea that those things existed. And while you certainly can run your game without them, and you can just tell the players that your character dies, there really isn't anything to do about it unless maybe, Wish. There just isn't anybody out there with Raise Dead or something like that, or it's really, 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 really rare, so just don't count on it. But I don't like doing that if I can avoid it, and that's not just about Raise Dead, but things like that in general. I don't really like going and just making these arbitrary decisions about the rules and prohibiting certain spells that are on the standard lists or what have you, because it's, as I say, it's not that I think D&D is a perfect game, but I think it's something that that's the way it was written. If you want to play that game, then that's going to be part of it. I do think you're free to impose certain things like dinging them for a whole wad of cash, possibly even gassing them or charging them with a quest or something like that, or a debt of servitude to the temple, or thinking it's a big deal. This guy was dead, a Minotaur gnawed his face off, and now he's up and breathing and asking for soup. That's a big deal, but I don't think it should be eliminated or prohibited. I think it should be something where the players can kind of decide, is this worth it? Granted, the guy whose character is lying on a slab might have a different opinion than the fellow who's like, well, wait a minute, I'm the one that has to give up the 5,000 gold piece emerald. I don't know how much I really like that guy. But that's all RP. That's all in character. That's all between the players amongst themselves. You as a GM are not involved in that. And therefore, in a way, to me, that's good. Because that's the kind of back and forth at the table that people are going to have fun with. If it gets down to an arguing over the wording of the rules, or somebody complaining that you're just being stingy with the magic or whatever, then you're devolving into this outside the game meta discussion. Whereas if it's about how much are you going to chip in to get Frank resurrected, that's in character. That's RP, and that's potentially fun. And that's what it's all about. Anyway, that's all for now. Take it easy.